On January 11th, President Tsai Ing-wen, she won the presidential election with a landslide victory with a record high of over 8 million votes. And do you think this is what the U.S. has been expected? And what do you make of her victory?
I am pretty sure that this is what the U.S. government expected. It was what most scholars expected. I think it was what people in Taiwan expected. The polls that showed that she had a big lead turned out to be correct. There wasn't a problem with the polling. So this is a strong endorsement from the public of her leadership. Now, the Kuomintang lost some seats, but it's still, not the Kuomintang, the DPP lost some seats in the legislature, but it still has an absolute majority.
Yes.
So that makes governing a little bit easier. President Tsai will have to negotiate with her LY caucus, but she doesn't necessarily have to negotiate with anybody else. So that's good. The most interesting thing about this election was the party vote.
Yes.
Where the DPP had a third, the Kuomintang had a third, and all the other small parties had a third. And Ko Wen-je's party got 10% of the party vote, 11%. So this suggests that Taiwan society is still fairly divided. And this is something that the Tsai administration is going to have to keep an eye on and find a way to deal with.
Okay, and in your opinion, how will the cross-strait relations develop after President Tsai's re-election? And now the DPP, as you said, continues to be the majority in Legislative Yuan, and KMT is severely defeated this time. And now, will this impact cross-strait relations?
I don't think so. You know, some people might ask, oh, should Tsai Ing-wen do something to bring about a better relationship with the mainland? Well, I'm not sure that it's absolutely necessary. I mean, if she wants to, fine. But she's just gotten a strong endorsement from the public.
Yes.
And they knew what she stood for. So it's not clear that she's the one who has to make the adjustment. I think that she's going to focus on some other directions. One is improving Taiwan domestically, particularly the economy, and continuing to improve U.S.-Taiwan relations. From the mainland's point of view, I don't think that they are going to accept the judgment of the Taiwan people and accommodate to President Tsai. I wish they would, but I don't think they will. The question concerning China is, do Chinese leaders believe that the window for unification is closing? That the possibility of unification, even in the long term, no longer exists? I don't think they need to come to that conclusion. They can explain the results of this election, first of all, by the bad campaign that Han Kuo-yu ran. Number two, they can explain it by events in Hong Kong and the skillful way that President Tsai built up that issue and used that issue to define the election. So these are temporary phenomenon. I would say that the result of this election clarifies what Taiwan people are against, but it doesn't necessarily tell us what they are for. And so that that creates I think a need for politicians to try and build broader consensus on what Taiwan is for. You know, President Tsai talks a lot about unity.
Yes.
And I think she's right. As for the mainland's response to this result, I said aren't going to accommodate to her. I don't think China will go to war. I'm pretty sure that China won't go to war. But I think they will continue doing the sorts of things they did during President Tsai's first term. Intimidation, pressure, marginalization, co-opting people within Taiwan society, and interfering in Taiwan's political affairs. And they can point to the fact that the KMT actually won more legislative seats this time than they won last time. They can point to the fact that the DPP only got 33% of the party vote, and maybe conclude that what is now important is what happens in 2024.
Yes, in 2024. You just mentioned that because President Tsai Ing-wen, she won with a landslide victory. So she's not the one who needs adjustment.
No.
So do you hint China will be the one who needs adjustment? And will China adjust?
As I said, I wish they would. I think that Tsai Ing-wen tried in 2016 to reassure Beijing about her intentions, and thought she had done it in a way that would be convincing, but in the end Beijing was unwilling to take yes for an answer. But I think that China's rather locked into its position.
Yes.
And Xi Jinping spoke on January 1st last year and made a pretty strong defense of Beijing's long-term policy. So I don't see them changing.
All right. So, and do you think there's any foreign interference in this Taiwanese election?
Well,
meaning the interference maybe from the China side or maybe from the U.S.?
Okay. First of all, there's a lot we don't know. I think that, based on what people in Taiwan tell me, that there were a lot of efforts from China or people connected with China to try and reshape the Taiwan opinion. At least for the presidential election, it doesn't seem to have had an effect. It may be that on certain legislative elections, it did have an effect. And, we don't have enough data yet to be able to say. I think one thing we may have learned in this election is that if the election is not close, then information interference doesn't work. And in this election, at least the presidential election, it was clear for a long time that President Tsai was going to win. As for the United States, we took a number of steps to strengthen U.S.-Taiwan relations, and the Tsai administration was very happy to take credit for that. This is a little bit of a complicated issue that, the United States likes a situation where Taiwan defines its interests in ways that are similar or the same as the way U.S. defines its interests. And if we have a close alignment, then the United States should do things to reinforce that relationship, to act on those shared interests. So do we stop doing that just because there's an election coming? Maybe we should have taken a break towards the end of the year. We didn't. But again, it wasn't a close election. If it had been a close election, then maybe that would have changed the result. But it wasn't.
Okay.
And, I think the Trump administration will continue doing what it's doing.
Yes, you just mentioned that about strengthen U.S.-Taiwan relations. So we see that in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2020, there is one section about report on cybersecurity activities with Taiwan. And what can the U.S. and Taiwan do together to strengthen Taiwan's cybersecurity?
Well, we both have a certain amount of experience. We were the victim of Russian interference. Taiwan has been the victim of PRC interference. I think we can learn from each other based on that experience. There are probably a number of technical ways in which U.S. experts could be helpful to Taiwan experts. and in creating defenses against this kind of interference. I think that perhaps the U.S. government has some lessons to share with Taiwan about how if you're going to have good cyber defenses, you need all agencies of the government to work together. You can't have the Ministry of National Defense doing one thing and the National Security Bureau doing another thing, and so on. And you really have to have mechanisms to get people to work together. And that's not easy. We had a hard time learning how to do that ourselves. So I'm not blaming Taiwan. This is just a problem that everybody has. I suspect that the greatest vulnerability to Chinese cyber activities has to do with the private sector and critical infrastructure, maybe not the government so much. I will say that one thing that Taiwan did right, and which maybe the U.S. can learn from, is there was a lot of hard work done to sensitize people to the fact that information interference takes place, that just because you see something on WeChat, it doesn't mean it's true. And I think actually the Taiwan public was more conscious of the possible sources of bad information than it may have been before.
Okay, let's focus now to what happens in Hong Kong. And we know that U.S. passed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act to support the people of Hong Kong. And it seems now the tensions in Hong Kong has been de-escalating right now. Do you think this is what the U.S. want to see?
First of all, I would note that the U.S. Democracy and Human Rights Act doesn't really change the basics of U.S. Hong Kong policy. The Congress, through this act, has required a lot of reports. It only ordered the executive branch to do a small group of things. But the basic approach to monitoring Hong Kong's autonomy and adjusting U.S. policy if necessary, that remains the same. Now, I'm sure that people in the U.S. government, people in the United States generally, are happy to see the situation calming down. I expect that people who understand Hong Kong know that it would be beneficial if the different actors in Hong Kong, the business tycoons, civil society, the opposition parties, the government, and so on, could get together and have a dialogue about how the Hong Kong system could be reformed in such a way that these sorts of protests don't happen again. I mean, in a way, these protests are a symptom of an underlying problem. And even if the protests die down, the problem still exists. And as long as it exists, there's always the possibility something will happen that will stimulate protests again. And so, you know, it really is important that Hong Kong society find a way to change the system so it benefits everybody rather than just some people.
Yeah, so you do see there's still some possibility for the tension to come back?
Yes, I do. I mean, if the fundamental problems of Hong Kong, the social and economic and political inequality, aren't addressed, then the only way that common people have to express their feelings and get the government to respond is to protest. And so, you know, you have to address the underlying problems. I think there are a lot of smart people in Hong Kong. They understand that these basic problems exist. They wish a way could be found to try and correct them for the benefit of everybody. But it's hard to get the process going.
Yeah. Okay. And also on January 15th, the U.S. and China just signed a preliminary trade deal. And do you think that U.S. is satisfied with the trade deal, and why?
Well, I would emphasize the word you use, preliminary.
Preliminary.
And I think because it's preliminary or because it's just phase one, more people are unhappy than happy. Obviously, President Trump is very happy. U.S. government officials pretend to be happy. But I think we could have had this deal 2 years ago. I mean, this is such a basic deal, a preliminary deal.
But the trade war just initiated 2 years ago.
Well, it started in early 2018, but I think even in sort of the middle of 2018, or if the two sides had focused on what they could agree on then, they probably could have had a deal, or sometime last year. The structural issues that some people in the administration wanted to address through negotiations, but they had to put it aside, not much has been done. Because the structural issues haven't been well addressed, the business community is unhappy because the business community is the main victim of these structural issues. So there's a lot that's still to be done. I don't think we're going to have phase two very soon. It is in China's interest to address these structural issues because the current status quo is really not good for the Chinese economy and the Chinese people.
So many bad things happen in China-related area.
Yes.
So do you think now the preliminary deal is good enough for President Trump's re-election?
Well, obviously he wanted a phase one deal. He wanted some kind of deal because he didn't want to go into the election without one. But I think there are a lot of other issues out there that are going to be more on the mind of voters. Number one, President Trump's character. Number two, the impeachment process. Even if he's not convicted, he was impeached. And that's a serious problem for him. I think that a lot of people have been hurt by his policies with respect to health care, with respect to immigration, and so on. So, I can see a way how he could win re-election, but I could also see a way that he's easily defeated. And it will be because of these other issues that he's defeated and people will forget about the phase one deal.
I see.
A lot of people are worse off because of that deal. I mean, to the extent that I'm purchasing products from China through Amazon, if those products were hit by tariffs, I'm probably paying more for those products than I had to. And, I can afford it, but people less well off than I, maybe they have to not buy something that they wanted to buy simply because the tariffs have gone up.
Yeah, so for the preliminary deal, it seems that the U.S. is now in upper hand, and we have seen so many bad things recently happen in China. We are talking about the Wuhan coronavirus breakout, now has spread around the world, and the city of Wuhan has been blocked, locked down. And what do you make of China's way of handling the virus? And Taiwan also has found many cases of patients with the coronavirus, but Taiwan has been excluded from by the the WHO. And what can the U.S. do to help Taiwan?
One link between the coronavirus and the trade deal. I think it will be harder for China to make its purchase commitments from purchasing products from the United States because of the coronavirus. That's one thing to watch. But my understanding of what has happened since the virus became a big issue is, on the one hand, the central government and particularly government scientists have done an outstanding job in identifying the virus and getting a better understanding of its genetic makeup. And that is helping health authorities around the world prepare for it. I think that the authorities in Wuhan did a terrible job. They kept secret for about a month the fact that there was a serious health issue. And they didn't tell people in Wuhan that that something bad was happening. The city authorities had a banquet for 40,000 people, even though they knew that there was a virus spreading. This reflects something bad in the Chinese system.
They didn't dare to report to the central.
Exactly right. And particularly for a system like China, if the lower people don't have the courage to report to the top people, you're going to have problems like this on all different kinds of issues. So I think, in the end, the response to this virus will be better than it was to SARS, when we had the same sort of problems with people not willing to report and not being transparent. But the improved performance this time will not be because of the response of the Wuhan authorities.
But I saw the news report that President Xi Jinping, he met with the chairman of WHO yesterday and saying that China will do the best to combat the virus. But however, Taiwan is still excluded from WHO. But Taiwan is also the area that got affected. So what can Taiwan do and what can U.S. do to help?
Well, first of all, we have to note that if China's goal is to win the hearts and minds of Taiwan people, this is yet another way that they are doing the opposite. How can Taiwan people be happy with a situation where they are quarantined, to use a health term, from useful information? What will happen in this case is that Taiwan health authorities will work with U.S. health authorities, the CDC, and CDC will provide whatever helpful information they can. And so maybe information from the WHO is reaching Taiwan indirectly, and that's a good thing. But again, Taiwan people, they see who their real friend is.
I think now Taiwanese people are angry, or maybe the government officials from Wuhan, they have to hide the fact before the January 11th election in Taiwan.
Well, maybe that's the case, but yeah.
Do you think that this virus has impact on Xi's administration?
Probably not. My guess is that economic growth will not be affected by this. It may be affected by other things, but not by the virus. That maybe the growth will slow down in the early months, but then it'll pick up the rest of the year. I think that Xi is in a good position to blame the Wuhan authorities for whatever happens and say, if I had known in advance or early on, we could have done much better, but it's their fault. So he'll probably be okay.
Okay.